Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Additive Manufacturing Deployments in Southeast Asia webinar. My name is Stephen Las Marias, and I'm the editor of Asia Pacific Metalworking Equipment News magazine. Before we begin, I'd like to point your attention to the Ask Question button on the right-hand panel of your screens, wherein you can submit your questions throughout the session. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like, as we will spend the last 10 to 15 minutes of the sessions going through them. All right. So earlier this year, market analyst Grandview Research projected a total additive manufacturing market size of $35.38 billion by 2027, growing at a compound annual growth rate of 14.6% from 2020 to 2027. Post-COVID-19, however, research firm Markets and Markets forecasts the global 3D printing market size to grow from 11.4 billion dollars in 2020 to $30.2 billion by 2025, growing at a CAGR of 18% during the period of 2019 to 2025. The market for this year is actually estimated to drop by more than 19% in comparison to the pre-COVID-19 estimates. According to analysts, a key reason for this is that although the operation of 3D printers is expected to be high this year, most of the activities for which the printers or services are being employed are being done for free of cost during this time of need. But despite the negative effects of the current pandemic, there are certain COVID-19 specific drivers that will allow the 3D printing technology and market to grow. The disruption, for instance, the disruption caused in the global supply chain has forced companies to look at technologies which allow for remote manufacturing capabilities without the need for investments in large areas. For this, 3D printing provides the answer. Further to this, the pandemic has created the need for companies to maintain digital copies and assets relating to data for the manufacturing of a component or object. In any case, the 3D printer bridges the gap by being able to utilize these digital designs to produce products as and when required. It is no longer just in time, but just in case. The 3D printing market will continue to generate revenues in 2020, of course, although not as much as initially estimated before the pandemic. The losses of the first half of the year are expected to be compensated to a certain extent by the revenue generated in the second half. Growth in the following years will be as a result of backlog of orders across all end user industries, as well as sales from new customers who previously had not thought of employing 3D printers until the pandemic had portrayed the benefits. Overall, it is still a very optimistic future for the industry. And while the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has stalled manufacturing activities worldwide, it has at the same time highlighted the speed and flexibility of 3D printing to create and deliver the desperately needed healthcare equipment and devices. A few examples of this you will see in the presentations and case studies to follow. Of course, the 3D printing industry is not without its challenges, such as when it comes to the efficiency that the process yields, the machines, the materials, and definitely the costs. In addition to this, additive processes also require knowledge of the material, the power source technology, power temperature, and the rate of bead deposition, among many others. Which is why we at Asia Pacific Metalworking Equipment News magazine, in cooperation with SLM Solutions, Siemens, Universal Robots, Markforged, NAMIC, and Globaldata, are holding a two-part webinar aimed at helping manufacturers understand 3D printing better through different successful deployments, the experiences gained, and experts' insights on the way forward for additive manufacturing in Asia. Our webinar today, the first installment of our two-part webinar, we'll talk about the different AM deployments in Southeast Asia, the process challenges, and the key considerations towards successful adoption of AM. The second part, which will be held on December 15, will also feature a panel of 3D printing experts to discuss their experiences gained in deploying or helping deploy additive manufacturing projects or processes and the future for 3D printing in ASEAN. Without further ado, our first speaker today is David Bicknell. Based in the UK, David is a principal analyst for Thematic Research at Globaldata. He will talk about where we are right now amid this global pandemic, 3D printing and the changing supply chains, and the developments in 3D printing in Southeast Asia.
Thank you for inviting me to present to the webinar. I'm David Bicknell, Principal Analyst at Thematic Research at Globaldata in the UK, and I'm delighted to talk to you today. I'm going to talk about a few things today. I'll talk about the pandemic and its impact on the 3D printing industry. I'll talk about some of the things that have happened in 2020 and look at what we might expect in 2021. Supply chains have been much disrupted in 2020, and I'll discuss the opportunity that offers for 3D printing. I'll talk about 3D printing in Southeast Asia and Asia more widely. And I'll reprise the impact of coronavirus at the end of the presentation. But first, let me tell you something about Thematic Research. We're part of Globaldata. As our name suggests, we're focused on themes. What's a theme? A theme is something that keeps the chief executive awake at night. And there have been a few of those this year. We started off the year thinking that the main theme of the year would be sustainability, until March, that is. Now, of course, it's COVID-19. 3D printing is an important theme, and you can see this in the theme map. It's really very simple. Companies who invest in the right themes become success stories, and those who miss the big themes in their industry end up as failures. You can see from this slide some examples, the relevant themes that were instrumental in different companies' fortunes, their rises and their falls. We use scorecards to track companies' performance in individual themes. Our scores show how well positioned a company is to benefit from a theme over the next 1 to 2 years. A company might be a market leader today, but if it's not well positioned in the most important themes, it will not be a leader tomorrow. For example, Nokia was the market leader in 2006, but was destined to fail because it missed big themes like touchscreens and apps. Red scores indicate a company is vulnerable or a follower. Green shows a company is a leader or is dominant. Yellow usually means a company is not much in this theme. And here is one of the scorecards with the key themes across the top. This is our consumer electronics scorecard, and you can see Stratasys and 3D Systems in here. There's no real reason for including this slide other than to show, I think, how the world has changed this year as a result of coronavirus and how everyone is trying to survive the impacts of the pandemic. So let's take stock and look at where COVID-19 has left us. If you think back to March and April, the 3D printing industry was saving lives, coming to the rescue of an Italian hospital when producing a replacement valve for a ventilator. A local engineer in Italy was able to take his 3D printer to the hospital and to design and print replacement valves for the machine. The story gave 3D printing unparalleled exposure and brought lots of pictures like in this slide. Let's take a look at what 2020 has brought. As we've seen, there's been a positive side in terms of the profile of the industry, but like every other sector, it's come at a cost. The lockdowns that have affected businesses have had an impact on financial results for every company. As well as Materialise's results listed here, Stratasys just reported a 9% quarterly recovery in its consolidated revenue between Q2 and Q3 2020. During Q3 2020, it generated revenue of $127.9 million, which was a 19% decline on the $157.5 million reported in Q3 2019, but still a 9% sequential improvement on the 28% drop seen in Q2 2020. But clearly, there have been casualties, as you can see from the quotes about Voodoo Manufacturing, which said the pandemic was the root cause of its collapse. Looking ahead to 2021, I was struck by the results of a survey by MakerBot in September this year that reported that 74% of companies plan to invest in 3D printing in 2021. MakerBot released results from its inaugural 3D Printing Trends report, which included 1,200 respondents across the aerospace, industrial and consumer goods, defense, medical and automotive industries. Of those surveyed, 74% said they were planning to invest in additive manufacturing technology this year or next year, with 50% planning to spend up to $100,000. Additive manufacturing as a potential medium for flexible manufacturing and mass customization as the global manufacturing community rushes to adopt those demands. 68% of the survey participants said they use 3D printing for its ability to create custom low to mid volume parts, and 57% said additive manufacturing's ability to create complex geometries was the reason they use 3D printing. Apart from parts production, 3D printers are also commonly used in conceptual design, with 70% using additive manufacturing for concept modeling, 66% for functional prototypes, and 44% for research and development. As with many technologies, there are barriers preventing companies from investing in 3D printing. For one, the adoption of additive manufacturing comes with a large price tag. 53% of respondents say lack of budget was the reason for reluctance in purchasing, and 29% said their purchasing reluctance stemmed from the lack of technical training. Respondents also expected the technology, materials, and applications to develop over the next 3 to 5 years. 61% of respondents said they expected more materials to emerge, while 58% expected the cost of using the technology to decrease. 31% of survey participants said they use a 3D printer daily, and the majority, 77%, said they own 1 to 5 printers. The most common materials used in their processes were plastics, 93%, and resins, 25%. Still looking back at 2020, the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, Singapore's National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Cluster, and the Singapore Ship Association announced phase 2 of their joint industry program to implement additive manufacturing in the marine industry. Also in 2020, we've seen a 30% increase in the number of different 3D printing materials compared with 2019. The SEMVOL database lists 2,245 different additive manufacturing materials in 2020, compared with around 1,700 materials in 2019, around a 30% increase. The uptake of 3D printing for medical applications has certainly accelerated material development for the sector. One area seeing growth is high-performance polymers for 3D printing of implants. And Desktop Metal, which said in August that it has agreed to go public through a reverse merger with blank check company Trine Acquisition in a deal that values the metal 3D printing technology provider at $2.5 billion, launched a solution that could eliminate the trial and error required to achieve high accuracy parts using sinter-based metal powder manufacturing processes such as binder jet additive manufacturing and metal injection molding. The software corrects for the shrinkage and distortion parts experienced during sintering. We did a forecast for the 3D printing market last year, which suggested that by 2025, 3D printing will be a $32 billion industry, rising to over $60 billion by 2030. But of course, when we did those forecasts, we couldn't have foreseen what has happened to the world's businesses this year. As we've seen, COVID-19 is a black swan event, which refers to an event so rare and unusual it cannot be anticipated. There have been numerous, though less global events with supply chain impacts, such as the Fukushima nuclear reactor meltdown and Hurricane Katrina. But supply chain interruptions have become increasingly commonplace in recent years. And all of them, including COVID-19, contain lessons to help companies and policymakers better prepare for the next inevitable black swan, if they're willing to take a less myopic approach. If people hadn't heard about black swan events before, they certainly know what they are now, especially if you're a supply chain professional. COVID-19 has thrown supply chains across industries around the world into a state of disarray. Its disruption is unprecedented in our lifetimes. One thing that's become painfully obvious is just how unprepared companies and their supply chains are to respond to the current global pandemic. This slide shows how the world suffered a supply chain nightmare. You can see the share of all intermediate products coming from China. And so the world suffered a supply chain paralysis. You can see lots of headlines there. And therefore, we will see a need to build a more resilient supply chain. And we'll see extensive reshoring and multi-shoring of supply chains using 3D printing. with top 3D printing companies rapidly making the technology more accessible to a wide range of industries. More and more companies have embraced 3D printing's streamlined supply chain. The benefits of this optimized supply chain are increasingly evident. Transitioning to on-demand manufacturing leads to cost savings by eliminating or significantly reducing inventory requirements. The benefits of digital files also provide the ability to quickly produce new iterations at little or no additional cost. With a single source for a variety of parts, businesses that use 3D printing contract manufacturers deal with less risk, more control, and added agility in relation to their product lifecycle. Local facilities can 3D print designs on demand from files sent across the globe, or they can print securely from a nearby supplier. Here I've listed a few developments across Southeast Asia, from Singapore to Vietnam, and I'm sure we'll hear from Siemens about its investment in Singapore during the webinar. HP recently did a survey on digital manufacturing that examined current perceptions of digital manufacturing and 3D printing and its ability to help companies become more resilient in this time of accelerated change. The digital manufacturing report found that companies are increasingly embracing a shift towards 3D printing solutions that provide the speed, innovation, and flexibility necessary to be more agile in an ever-changing environment. But there are some marked regional differences in Asia. For example, in Singapore, 100% of respondents believe that digital manufacturing technologies can lead to economic growth. 78% of respondents indicated they will invest in digital manufacturing technologies in the next 12 months, with 86% indicating an expected investment increase in additive manufacturing and 3D printing. 97% of respondents said they're investigating new production supply chain models, with 66% evaluating hybrid models and 56% looking into localized production. And as you can see, there are slightly different figures between Singapore and China, and lower figures for Japan. I wanted to take us back to the impact of the pandemic to finish. We've seen lots of examples of where masks and visors have been 3D printed for personal protective equipment. I've just shown a couple of examples here, which give an indication of the versatility of 3D printing. From new door handles that offer some protection against the virus, to devices that sound an alarm if someone's hands approach their face, to the first ever printed biomimetic tongue surface, because with the onset of the pandemic, social distancing has posed significant challenges to carry out such sensory trials and consumer tests. A biomimetic tongue will be immensely useful to help increase development productivity and reduce manufacturers' reliance on human trials in the early stages. To summarize, I'd like to show this slide, which shows the impact of the virus or vaccine on the supply chain. I originally built this slide for a presentation about smart cities with the impact on the built environment. But the principle applies for supply chains and the role of 3D printing in them. 3D printing offers the product customization, reduced complexity, improved time to market, improved resource efficiency, rationalized inventory and logistics, and our supply chain can be local, not global. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions on it later. Thank you.